wonder sometimes if the average person today could be sent back, I don't know, 1,000 years or 2,000 years or even 500 with the ability to say something that would make it obvious that they're from the future. Or if the average person would try and then end up sort of being forced to blend in and just become part of whatever time they were sent to. Like, what sort of statement or anything could a person do armed with what we know today that would dramatically alter what ends up happening? What could be said to the average person back then that would suddenly make them be like, yeah, this person's definitely from the future, and they clearly know something? I think it would be harder than one imagines, because simply forecasting events is not enough, because depending on where and when exactly you go, it still takes time for those events to even happen, and they happen a lot slower than we might imagine that they do. So it's like, unless you brought an iPhone or a modern book, or you brought something with you, and even then, that could easily just get tucked away and become something of a myth or legend, or not even proliferate. Like, how, if you brought a car, I don't really know that ends up going too far without Henry Ford. Somebody to continuously drive it, no pun intended, and actually make more and more of them and try to sell them. Who understands it inside and out? Like, if you brought a car back and you had people looking at it, knocking on it and opening up the hood, and they might have absolutely no attachment to it or see the value in it at all, and think it's some sort of like art piece, or because you wouldn't even have gas back then as well. You wouldn't even be able to refill the fuel, and in order to be able to do that, you would have to have refineries set up, and you'd have to have people extracting oil and gas and all these things. It would be completely useless without that, and it would slowly decay. Honestly, I think one of the most valuable things you could do is go to just about anywhere and say that if you keep going west, there's a whole other continent. Because it ended up being a race. Once it was found out, it ended up being this kind of like multi-decade competitive situation. And to the first one who got there and really took it, you were going to dramatically change world history. That's probably the biggest chunk of information. Simply go west. And if you could get somebody to believe that, like, that's one thing that you could say over and over again, and be very, very persuasive, because you know it's there, A, and B, you know you can get there. And if you can just convince somebody, to send 20 ships, knowing not all of them are going to make it, then you have something. Because if you were the one to do that, you would dramatically change too, probably, how that took shape as well. And I know that there were people there for thousands of years, but at the end of the day, if you want something, you have to take it. And if you want to keep something, you have to defend it. And you try as you might. If you lose, you lose. And I would even say that about today's circumstances. If you hypothetically say you're somebody who has an eye on the United States and you want it, you'd love to have it, well, come and take it, dude. That's that's it at the end of the day. Come and take it. If you can't do that, then try to take it slowly over time, socially, I guess. But even then, people like this place too much to have it change too dramatically. And that really is it. You're just going to have to come and take it. And the same can be said for a person, an individual in their own life. If you can't do that, then it's all just sort of words. Come and take it. And, you know, that statement carries so much weight because that will stop people in their tracks or further compel them. And it's strange with men over history. Something like dueling or something like war really was decisive because it said the thing that nobody could put into words, really, you know, because people talk a lot of shit. Like, you can talk a lot of shit, you know, and really what it boils down to is a simple duel is, if I win, then I'm simply better, and if I lose, then I wasn't as good. It's just that simple. There's no other way to spin it. Same with a country or an army. And that's why we still like sports. I was better. And it's just that simple. Like, it's just the truth. And the strange thing about dueling too is people were like pretty serious about it. And some people would cheat, you know, but if you cheated, it's a dangerous game because it's something you have to carry with you. It's not so easy to walk around knowing that you're just not good enough to win without cheating. You know, it sounds like a small thing, but it's not something you want to carry around. You'd rather probably lose without cheating, I would say. And even though we don't duel these days, you know, that spirit still exists. And it's alright to say that the world has been a little feminized, you know. It's just true. It's a natural outgrowth of women becoming more part of society in certain ways. So it's a natural thing to expect that. So we end up in this strange situation that can be true for an individual's life and an entire country and culture. It keeps going in circles until the correct things are learned. It stays in a circle time until certain things are learned. If certain things are not learned, it literally continues to repeat over and over and over again with minimal variation. Say you have a small family who has the ability to make fire, has the ability to hunt, and, you know, has relatively rudimentary things that were a big deal back then. And this family continues to grow, and that ends up being about their limitation. That lifestyle will go on and on and on and on and on. With variation, yes, you know, ups and downs, but that situation will just continue on until more is learned. And the strange thing is, more can be learned and then fall right back down to where it was. I'm sure there have been many times where a group of people or a person has learned something very valuable, noticed it, maybe put it to use, and then it disappeared and ended with their life, or maybe their son's or daughter's life or whatever. Maybe it went on for a little while, but it falls back down. one of the craziest slash most important things that we ever did was set up these schools, which was a heavily Greek thing. I mean, I'm sure there were schools before that, but the academy, I think it was Plato, and then Aristotle with the Lyceum. And the people that were there had such a massive advantage over everybody else because they had access to what these guys were talking about, that it was night and day. Because learning things, noticing things, and keeping track of them are just as important. You have to get it down, because other people are going to come along that notice things that you would have never noticed before. It's almost like we have a certain limitation on how much we can notice about something, and then we add our contribution and pass it down. But even in the long run, strangely, it's like it still forms circles, but the circles get bigger and bigger. You know, it becomes like multi-century circles instead of really tight lifetime circles. But even though time seems to be circular, it also has an upward movement as well. Like it's like a magnification situation where it's spinning in a circular way, but it's also still moving up at the same time, or moving down. And history is weird too. I don't know about you, but it was not that interesting until recently, actually, the last handful of years. And I didn't even know that not only was Socrates Plato's teacher, but they lived at the same time, and Plato was Aristotle's teacher. And Aristotle was Alexander the Great's teacher. These four dudes were connected in a very short period of time. But that chain of events, that chain of people, greatly expanded and grew the human situation in ways that it's hard to even quantify. And then you obviously had Alexander the Great, who did what he did, who seemed to be born to conquer. And we have a tendency, I think, to want to think that these things can kind of just be taught out of us, but I don't think so. I really don't. I think some of the edges can be softened or sharpened, and there can be some degree of flexibility, but I don't think that they can be fully extinguished, because I think people fail to understand what a human being even is, you know. I think it's more expansive than we would imagine, because think about how wild of a situation it is, where noticing something is the very smallest beginning of a thread to something so massive, but you can't know it until later. Maybe not even in your lifetime. You don't even know that you're pulling on this thread. But for whatever reason, this little thing is just so interesting that it just occupies your thoughts on a daily basis, and you have to seek it. And sometimes people know that this is what they're doing, but more often than not, I don't think so. And the variation of people too, it's like, it's hard not to notice that, how do you say it? Some people exist to be led, you know? It's just the way it is. It's similar to the way not everybody can start a business. If everybody started a business, then everybody would be sitting and waiting in need of employees. Everybody would be isolated and just kind of unable to expand, unable to grow, just be a one-man show. And it would limit what's possible if everybody owned their own business. And it would heavily dilute the market if you had millions of upstarts for, bread companies. And you had one guy trying to figure that out with absolutely no chance of help. And he's literally dealing with millions of other dudes and ladies trying to figure out how to make bread. And it just doesn't work. It's just not the way things are. But you do have situations where there is one dude or chick who is completely obsessed with bread for whatever reason. Bread is they're just all about it. And they bring people of varying skills along with them to make bread. And that's just how it goes, dude. That's exactly how it goes. There's somebody who owns a farm, and there's somebody who needs people on the farm to work as well. And our relationship to labor is definitely going to change soon. How could it not? It's one of those rare times, I think, right now where you can pretty clearly anticipate what's coming. And I don't think it's hype or a bubble. And I think it's going to turn out that all of the debt that the United States has taken on, is trillions of dollars, is going to end up being highly productive. When we were borrowing so heavily, we didn't know exactly what we were making. It is, as it always has been, a driving force. We are driven by something, and we don't know its exact shape yet, but we know some fragment of it that keeps us moving, some little bit of that thread that just keeps pulling. And you need some verification in the world. You need a little bit of evidence that what you're doing is doing something. And imagine ending up in a place, like I think about this sometimes, where labor is literally a thing of the past, yet still everything is still produced and made around the clock, even better. Like, hypothetically, imagine that scenario. What does a person do? I still think we will have every tendency in us, and we always will, but I mean, Alan Watts thought if you made everything too perfect, that eventually people would try to break it just to have something new happen. Like, if you made a situation to where it was all up and it was all marble walls and, gilded streets and gold everywhere, it would drive people absolutely insane. People would need some non-sanitary chaos. People would need some amount of spontaneity, which I completely agree with. So a wise civilization, if it has a chance to bring about such massive changes really, really quickly, would be wise to have places where that can happen. Which is why I think our drives take us there, to be honest, Like, if there isn't a coliseum or a football field, there's going to be somebody who says, we should have a large, spectacular sport. And if it doesn't exist in the world, there's going to be somebody who is utterly driven by that idea, especially because it doesn't exist. They're going to see small fragments of it in the behavior of people around them. And they're going to understand that there's something there that needs to be channeled, even if most people will never actually play. There needs to be something that people can identify with and go on a sort of abstract ride with that has a real sense of grounding in reality, you know. And I have no doubt we will do that. And I honestly think U.S. Manifest Destiny goes beyond the continent. Obviously, I think the U.S. is like the core of a star, and the closer you get to it, the more direct influence the U.S. has over it. But as technology progresses, I mean, over the last 40 years or so, for the sake of making some serious profit, the U.S. has been kind of generous in proliferating some of this stuff. I mean, when profit is your motive, your primary and only motive, you care less about the overall direction of a country, of your own country, you know. You see the potential for expansion in terms of international business, which is totally understandable. That's been the last 50 years. That has been the story. And it's led to things like TVs becoming super cheap. It led to Japan nearly surpassing us. That tiny little island, their economy was becoming extremely competitive with the U.S. And, you know, we didn't think they would be that good at it, you know. It was cheaper labor at first. It's always the same story. There's cheaper labor somewhere else because U.S. labor is so expensive. And you set up shop there and you crank the shit out of something and sell it out into the rest of the world. And that sort of thing, though, has a finite lifespan. You can't keep... It's almost like a resource, like anything else, that is exhaustible. Because it has a tendency to make wealthy those places and, I guess, quote-unquote, civilize those places, if you want to put it that way, and turns them into metropolises. It has these massive cast-off effects. Simply making a place wealthy has massive cast-off effects along with technology transfer, as well as a place that other places can look at as some sort of shining city on a hill to aspire to want the approval of. It places drives in people that animate certain things, like Japan, you know. And there needed to be more than one motive. Japan wanted to make money, yes, but they also felt guilty about World War II. That's a huge factor in what drove Japan over the last 100 years or so, 70 years. But over time, let's say hypothetically, what if the entire planet was quote-unquote first world, or quote-unquote civilized or wealthy? By that point, by the time billions of people find themselves in that situation, we will have completely surpassed the need for classic human labor, you know, because such a thing implies certain things. Yeah, I don't really think you get one without other certain things happening at the same time. And Buddhists and Taoists used to talk about getting out of cycles of karma, becoming free from cycles of karma. And karma is just another word for your doing. And learning the right things from the shit that we do is what bends that circle into a more of a straight line, for periods of time at least, or widens the circle or places you outside of these standard cause and effect cycles, because you're simply more aware of what you're doing. You're more aware of what's happening. And you have more of a will and more of a say in what happens because of your awareness. If you're not aware of anything, hypothetically, if you're completely blind to things, and you operate solely on drive, you will always do the same shit. And that's not a criticism or a judgment. It just is. It just is. And it's part of human faculty to notice certain things. But as I say that, I would also like to say that those drives are very important too. It's also very important to just be as well. There's always that tendency to want to become one or the other, or have one side of the dichotomy, the animal and the sentient, whatever you want to call it, dominate the other and win, so to speak, or finally be the victor in a eternal struggle, which is not the right way to look at it. They're both always going to be there. But sometimes one is stronger than the other, and it is those two things in, I guess you could say, proper harmony or synergy that makes this awareness even possible. It is both the doing and the seeing that makes this third thing, that is overall awareness, intelligence, or whatever, you know. But the U.S. Manifest Destiny goes beyond even Earth. How far can we go? Genuinely, that's my question. How far can humans go? And we're already at a point now where the momentum has built so heavily and so strongly that the train is firmly on the tracks. We are definitely going now, because so much has happened that has made us realize that certain things are even possible. I mean, before you go into space the first time, it's completely speculative what's going on up there. And a lot of people over the years have said a lot of things about space, about Earth, about what's happening. But just like biting into a steak and knowing that delicious flavor, you don't actually know until you do it. And once you do it, it's almost like that sea of potential collapses into something palpable. And that's been going on and on and on and on. And that's how it is with space right now. Now we know certain things. We know that the atmosphere isn't something hard that's breakable. That we used to think that there was something around the Earth that kept water out that you could puncture, and if you punctured it, then water would start falling. People used to think that we were literally underwater in something like a bubble, which totally understandable. To the naked eye, that's a completely reasonable thing to say. I could imagine myself saying that, 1,000 years ago, thinking that we're at the bottom of the ocean or floating somehow. But even all the way up until semi-recently, all the way up until, 60 years ago, it was still reasonable to say that, even in the 1940s. But once we actually got up there and started to relay that information back and document it, it does not collapse into form truly until you do it. Reality is an infinite sea of potential that collapses into form, into what one might call the truth, and that etches a fine carve into the shape of things, and it's stored into the shape of things, and it becomes what we experience all around us. And I honestly think we've reached a point in history. It's almost like this, like we've reached a point in history where after the Soviet Union fell, the tendrils extending from World War II and on kind of started to fall away, and we entered this new age, let's say. And we tried to globalize. We tried to let everybody in on the fun, so to speak. We tried to make people rich. We tried to claim that history was over. We tried to share. We tried to make borders a fixed thing that we weren't going to violate. And we thought that that would lead to a steady increase globally in one general trajectory. But that turned out to be wrong. It turns out we were fueling and making entities stronger that would one day seek to undo us. We actually helped our own potential undoing by thinking this way. And if we kept going on the track that we were going on, then we would have only increased that probability. So now, Earth and its direction is about knowing who your friends are and continuously making more friends, knowing who your enemies are because they have kind of shown their hand, knowing how to deal with them publicly as well as privately, because those are two different things. Some enemies are actually friends behind the scenes. And technological advancement has come so far that it's actually healthy to start to keep some of it and hold on to some of it without just giving it away for the sake of profit. That's no longer a good enough reason to do something. And you have to consider what might happen if you do. Like, some of this stuff is like very important to keep within your borders and protect. Some stuff needs to be siloed. Not unlike nuclear weapons, but even a better job than we did with that. And nuclear weapons kind of prove this idea, well, so far, that you can get as close to the line as humanly possible without crossing it. That can happen for a sustained period of time. And in a way, it kind of gives up the game just a little bit. In a way, it kind of gives credence to the theory that what we might consider good is, at minimum, 51% of what's happening, and what we might consider bad is at most 49% of what is happening, which is just close enough to keep it interesting, but not so far away from each other that we don't believe it. You know, it's just set up enough to where the threat is very real, and, you know, we're not talking 90-10 here, where the good is just so good that it reigns and dominates at all times, and the 10% is so small that we don't even hardly believe it's real. It's not 99-1. It's not even 60-40. It's more like 51-49. Or even maybe a little bit less. Maybe it's a little bit closer than that. But overall, what we might consider the good force seems to have a slight edge. And I say that too because things exist at all. If it was 49-51, that ratio might be in just enough for things to have not formed at all, for entropy to have been too strong a force on the basic constituents of matter all the way down to where nothing assembled, everything dissipated, and the basic constituents of matter never got dense enough. No electricity, no charge, no gravity, no cores, no anything. And everything just sort of was an ocean of gas and potential that never formed. And the fact that it did implies at least 51%, more than half, just a little bit. And the forces of entropy being something more like 49. Maybe with some variation sometimes and some fluctuation, but the fact that reality and time in the universe has gotten as far as it has with form for billions of years implies that what we might consider the good side or form or order or whatever has an edge. It certainly has an edge because the forces of entropy are constantly working on things of form as well. It's not like one side just wins, like I said, and it's game over. It's a constant going. And if that is true on the universal level, it is also true on the human level because we are reality too. So the forces that drive us, as well as the forces of reality as well, need to become objects of knowledge. They can't just go on in circles over and over and over again. I mean, they could. That's an option. But I just don't think human beings, as we are, will ever take that option. We always tend toward noticing and doing and incorporating and collecting and storing and adding and discovering. Curiosity is one of the forces. And there's always going to be people who come around who are just a little bit better at it. Who, like I said in the past, push the fast forward button for everybody else. But once one person can do it, they're like the tip of an arrow, you know. And there's something about it, there's some truth and insight to it that just seeps so far in, and it rests through us, and it's just like, yes, that's correct. You know, it's like the truest of true, and it really does change the way we actually exist on a day-to-day basis. It really is part of that 51% extending itself to become 70, and it takes over the forces of entropy or untrue things or chaos or whatever and makes it a little less significant for a time.